video, I'm going to be covering all the changes in this episode of One Punch Man Season 3. And it's a pretty good episode. I watched it on 0.5 times speed, and I actually needed to this time. So if you want to help me spot all the differences in the next episode, then, just join the Discord. We can yap, talk about the differences, and also we're building a small community there, and it's pretty wholesome. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoy the video. So first change right off the bat is when we get this panning shot of Gero, he doesn't say anything. He's supposed to say the real fight begins now, or the real fight is beginning. And instead of, getting the flashbacks to the Escott's heroes entering the Monster Association from multiple entrances, we're supposed to cut straight to Flashy Flash. This perspective is unique to the anime. It's not in the manga at all. In the manga, it is straight up right to a close-up, and then also to a close-up of his hand, and Child Emperor's monologue goes over that, along with a faded close-up of Child Emperor himself. Instead, the anime does a close-up of Flashy Flash's lower body as he lifts up the tracker, and a flashback to the Monster Association meeting room, where that isn't present at all in the manga. This image right here is CG. It's either CG or it's sketched over a 3D perspective shot. Shinbei Nagai particularly talked a lot about using 2D to 3D workflows to sketch out areas in certain fights so characters could be tracked better. And I think this is just one of the examples of the storyboard used a 3D model, and so the artist was able to just use that reference one-to-one here. It's very difficult to see because it's not moving, whether it's sketched over or if it's a 3D model, but regardless, it looks like a CG model. When the monsters call out to him, we're supposed to see a perspective change shot of below Flashy Flash as he reacts to these monsters calling him out. This shot of the three monsters approaching Flashy Flash is supposed to be far more dynamic, with Flashy Flash taking up more than half the panel to himself as these monsters start to approach him from the end of the corridor, only cutting to any form of close-up when Flashy Flash's blades slide into their skulls. In this close-up shot, we're missing the monster with weird ski mask head. He's supposed to be up here in the top left, but he's not present at all. Flashy Flash is never visible in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, but here they just use that as a transition point to make what's about to happen more, obvious. That character with the weird mask is back here now, and the perspective shot of him walking away is different here. It's supposed to be far more parallel with the actual corridor, but a really imposing image of Flashy Flash in the center of the screen as the monsters behind him die. But instead we use this perspective shot of down where the rubble is, and to be honest, it does add a bit more depth, but it's not as aura impacting as the manga's version. In this shot, when he's walking away, there should still be blood dripping down from his previous attack. We're then met with a shot of Flash Flash walking down this corridor with the razors right and left to him that we can see present throughout the rest of the corridor. But in the manga, we cut straight to the two ninjas clapping and Flashy Flash's reaction to that. This shot of Flashy Flash's reaction to all the torches being turned on by Hellfire's attack, or, just technique, I suppose, isn't actually supposed to spin around and look at Flashy Flash dead on. It's supposed to zoom down the corridor and then shoot over Flashy Flash's shoulder, showing a perspective shot from behind him. But instead, they turn the camera around and have it approach Flashy Flash, and then have a close-up on him. This is totally different than it is in the manga. We're supposed to see this sort of impact frame of Gale getting stabbed through the head of Flashy Flash, but it turns out that Gale was actually fast enough to dodge the attack. It's just that the human eye wouldn't have been able to track that. Is how I assume it was meant to be portrayed, which is very hard to do in anime medium because you're running on twos and stuff, and you can only have so many frames a second. So what they do is they just have him disappear the second the blade impact happens. We also get this forward-facing shot of Flashy Flash instead of the sort of distant, wide angle of seeing these two speed impacts of a character dashing forward and dashing away, while Hellfire just sits there without reacting at all. When the shot shoots up to show that Gale is clinging to the roof, which, by the way, I would like to point out is the opposite direction of his speed impact that, he left, but whatever. Yeah, Flash Flash's hair is supposed to be moving upwards because of that movement that Gale does to get up. This shot is supposed to be more zoomed out and from a slightly different perspective than straight on. And when he responds, he's supposed to lower his head. In this onslaught of blades, we're supposed to get a sort of distant shot showing Gale sitting there watching them clash, showing this energy dome of just speed impacts that the human eye couldn't comprehend. Instead, they skip that and the other distancing shot of that orb being formed to cut straight to the dialogue close-ups into Windblade Kick. This is a rare moment where this fall animation is far more dynamic than anything Murata put to paper. Murata just did a sort of perspective shot of Flashy Flash just kind of gliding through the air and then he lands. Not this cool spin and wire dodge that we see here. When he lands here, it's actually the wrong direction. He's supposed to be landing on the opposite side of him, and the characters are supposed to be facing that side. Also, Hellfire's blade is not supposed to be on fire right here. The way he puts a thread through his mouth is slightly different than it is in the manga. The perspective shot of Flashy Flash's, panning up is slightly different for many reasons. One, he's just in the wrong pose. Two, it's a different perspective shot. And three, we're supposed to see burn marks through the fabric that he's wearing. It's supposed to show the body underneath, and it's supposed to put holes in multiple parts of his clothing. This is an issue I've noticed in many JC projects, is that, Gale's head is a little long. Like, he's kind of got a crazy forehead here. And I think that's mainly because they animate this part of the face, but because he has this hairband, they've had to drop animation area lower, so the face is like animated from here up, and they're supposed to leave the rest of this sort of static for when he's talking. So I think that's why we're left with this massive gap between his hairline and his eyebrows. Like, Gale has a pretty big forehead in the manga, but you gotta keep in mind, I feel like this was supposed to be where his hairline was, and that's probably where it had been drawn or something, but because he needed to put the hairband in, they sort of slapped it on top and extended here. Regardless, his forehead is way too big here. There's a shot where Hellfire's blade is supposed to be lit up. He's supposed to light it here, I assume, because it wasn't lit in the previous shot. We're supposed to see that Flash is noticing that there's cobwebs in the both right and left hand corners. In the anime, that's not so clear because there's no visual cobwebs he's looking to here. He's just looking around, which could mean anything, really. Then we're supposed to cut to the close-up of him stancing up. A small thing I noticed here, sure, the perspective is like slightly different. Nothing that can be helped there. But there is supposed to be wind coming down this corridor, and it's supposed to be moving Gale's hair. We're supposed to cut straight to a close-up of Flashy Flash's face, zooming towards them, but instead we zoom in on Flashy Flash's heels to show that he's stepping forward, and then a close-up on Gale. So essentially they're swapping out that close-up shot of Flashy Flash's face for that heel shot. That cut transition before, they have it here as sort of like a after impact effect. And it just shows the lines in which it was impacting and then explodes, losing a lot of that detail that we would have expected. And instead of showing the rubble falling and breaking all of Gale's wire, we cut straight to Gale's reaction of that explosion, saying he cut away all the walls. Here Flash Flash asks, are they from the village? When the shot is on Gale, but instead it's supposed to be only when it's on Flashy Flash. The slab that they're on is supposed to have those impacts and crevices that are visible in the battle, but here it's just a plain slab that's like spins over. We're supposed to see that they're falling first by seeing the sticks from the braziers falling by themselves. Then this really like wide shot of the sticks falling, but also Flashy Flash, Gale, and Hellfire all falling into this chasm with a waterfall and two bridges. But instead we take this backwards angle showing the three of them fall from behind Gale and Hellfire with Flashy Flash in the back. Then it spins round to a close-up on Flashy Flash and to a similar layout than the previous manga panel. Action anime lines shooting up from the bottom of the screen, transitioning into the same area with the waterfall that realistically only has two bridges in the manga, but here has three. As Gale is doing his thread attack again, we're supposed to see Hellfire reaching to draw his blade as he falls, as Flashy Flash dashes in, but instead we just see him fall into the distance and Flashy Flash isn't present at all. Also, we get this completely different perspective shot of the threads ripping into the side of the cliff instead of him going directly for Flashy Flash and falling right and left of him. The close-up shot of Flashy Flash is totally new as well, as is him running along the side of the cliff as he runs down towards Gale. We're only supposed to see literally Flashy Flash on top of Gale already swinging his sword into his blade. Instead we get this like pretty dynamic like action shot of Flash Flash like jumping across this horizontal cliff face as these wires attack him and he dodges every single one of them. Then we get that impact frame from a totally different angle than we did in the manga. See, he's supposed to impact and then a close-up of Gale, but instead we get the impact and then they hold that shot. Then the close-up of Gale and a close-up of Hellfire, then a close-up of Flashy Flash into this storm blade kick that they're both doing. So that's all different from in the manga, and they don't actually include Flashy Flash dodging this attack in the anime. It's just assumed that he jumped out of the way, but they visually tell us this all in the same panel in the manga. Then something that's also completely new is this close-up shot of Flashy Flash and as he slides down the cliff away from their attack. Instead, the manga cuts straight to Flashy Flash on top of them swinging his blade and them dodging his attack. So we don't get to see Flashy Flash's dash towards them, but he does swing the sword, which wasn't visually obvious to me at least, but we can see that they have jumped away from Flashy Flash regardless. Although that was really close to the manga, the posing was slightly different than in the anime. And they've changed the perspective for some reason in this shot. Gale is supposed to be in the back, while Hellfire is supposed to be in the front. And the rocks that they're standing on look totally different. These look like kind of flat surfaced rocks, but the rocks in the manga are very clearly just rubble from something that fell before. As they monologue, we get a return to this perspective shot that we had of the area they are fighting in. So this shot where they're introduced isn't actually the same really at all in the anime. We're supposed to get, as they're monologuing, a pose of a close-up of Flashy Flash and then a sort of like pseudo close-up on our two ninjas when they announce that we are your butchers. We're from the Golden 37th, which whatever that means, because as an anime reader, you have no fucking idea what that means. And they're supposed to introduce themselves as Tempest Wind and Hellfire Flame. And then we get their title cards. But here, instead, we just get a close-up right after they monologue, introducing their title cards. So that initial impact there was not in the manga, the first one. Then this is slightly different than it is in the manga. See, here in the manga, we see Hellfire come in immediately from a slightly different angle, and Gale coming in with a kick, then a clash of his sword. But in the anime, they have to make this work in like a seamless way. So he comes in from this angle with his sword, and then Gale comes in with a clash, and then a kick. Then this whole transaction at the end where he's kicking Hellfire off and blocking his attack, while also being met with the onslaught of the continuous attack of the two of them all at once, that isn't in the manga at all. And this spiral transition thing is way different than it is in the manga. In the manga, the kind of impact is supposed to morally represent how fast they're going, and we're supposed to see these impacts along the travel line of this visual. But in the anime, the visual is already finished, and we don't get to see the travel line until the last like 2 seconds, if not second and a half of the shot, where we see the lines travel down into the distance where we can't see them. Then we see Flashy Flash falling, which isn't something we see in the manga. We see that spiral hit the ground, and then 3 speed lines of each of these characters running along the water from this sort of distance shot. But in the anime, Flashy Flash hits the ground, goes running, and then we see the other 2 ninjas follow behind him, and their water trails act as a transition point for this clash that is, I'm not gonna lie, sure it could look better, but in terms of movement and the impacts is really hard to track, but it's really close to the manga. This shot should be a little wider out because as he's saying this, he's supposed to also be blocking attacks, but this seems to be a bit of a break in the onslaught so he can deliver this line. This wide angle pan is not in the manga at all. It simply cuts to a spiral of them climbing up the waterfall and all these impacts happening within the waterfall. Then they all come from behind the waterfall to clash one more time together at the top of the waterfall for a big sort of explosion. Instead, we get this like bird's eye view shot of them clashing in the water in the mist underneath the 2 bridges, then quickly cut to the waterfall where we see these lights transition again, delivering the same impact, you know, for when these clashes and attacks are happening, but just not showing the direction in which the characters are moving. And instead of having the clash happen at the top of the waterfall from the same perspective, it's a little confusing to me personally, but they have this colored speed line transition that happens completely by itself. And I was gonna say that they didn't have the characters doing the right poses for landing here, by the way, but they do. They actually do. The only difference is that Hellfire isn't supposed to be holding his katana. That's the only difference I could genuinely spot. The first shot after they land on the bridge is not supposed to be a close-up of Hellfire. We're supposed to get that laughing reaction from that same shot. Then the first shot we're supposed to see is this shot here of Gale with his forehead corrected. His spiral pattern on his headband is actually upside down for some reason here, and his eyes should be a little bit more squintier. This perspective shot is slightly different in the manga. It is over his shoulder, that's correct, and we do get to see a bit more detail with the bridge and the difference in perspective, but for some reason we're supposed to have the waterfall in the background. So what the anime has done the perspective shot from the perspective Gale was previously standing at, but for some reason Murata decided this side would look cooler, so Gale is going to teleport over here so that when we look at Flashy Flash for this contemplative shot, he can look so cool and like aura farm in front of the waterfall. We're also supposed to be able to see Gale's face and reaction to Flashy Flash's non-reactive posture. See, we have this like mist coming in from the left to kind of replicate that waterfall, because they did correct the perspective in this shot. Sure, it doesn't look as cool because of that, but it is like correct. In this shot of where Gale is listing all the ninjas he's killed that have come after him, their positioning is backwards. I'm not sure as to why they've done this, but the bridge is supposed to be on the right side of the cliff, and the two ninjas are supposed to be on the right side of the bridge, while Flashy Flash is supposed to be on the left. Gale is supposed to be spinning this blade to right side, so that Gale is supposed to be spinning this blade to the left side of the screen because Hellfire is supposed to be standing behind him, behind the blade. We're supposed to see a sort of like vibrating effect when he says thank you, because they're already traveling at the speed of sound and light towards him to, you know, continue this onslaught. We miss an outward shot of the first initial impacts that go around the bridge, cutting straight to where Gale is right up in Flashy Flash's face, and we get this different and like new perspective shot of above the two ninjas colliding. This reaction of Flashy Flash spinning away after the impact is an anime original. He's supposed to just tank the hit and slide back while he thinks about, well, you know, not all ninjas are from the same village as us. Flashback to the previous episode or past chapter where he confronts that other ninja. Something I really appreciate them doing, it left that line up to the imagination. We don't need to know exactly what he's talking about, and if you've forgotten, well, you don't really deserve to know. But they don't use a sort of flashback or visual to indicate exactly what he's talking about, because it would take away from the fight they're currently having. The impact is supposed to show Flashy Flash dashing between them, not just him standing there after landing already. And we're supposed to see the impact of the cut on their faces, and then Flashy Flash is supposed to walk away. But we actually get to see this lightning bolt of a stab that does damage to these two heroes, and we get an extra added part of Flashy Flash spinning from over above them, landing down to give off this line. Not to mention we get another added panel in the anime of that panning shot from behind him. This shot is slightly different. They're supposed to be like, we're evil, rawr, we're turning into monsters now, to like prelude the fact that they're about to do that. Also, there's another flashback frame here I censored from you earlier. We're supposed to get like a kind of memory from Flashy Flash that covers up most of his face. I'm really glad that they didn't do that again here. As I said, I feel like it would take us out of the fight. Obviously, these transformations are a little different from the, you know, manga, because their designs are slightly different from in the manga. So I'm gonna mark down 10 differences for the transformation, and also the differences in shot as Flashy Flash gives his exposition dump here. There's 2 panels that are different that weren't included in the anime. Though there is detail lost because Murata's artwork is unbelievably, unfathomably detailed, we do get a pretty like good representation of the movement that would have been happening here. Extra shots of them clashing and like running around the platform, and Hellfire's pretty big impact. They do skip over a close-up of Flashy Flash before we see Burst Fire impact, which in the anime is a single strike, but in the manga is multiple strikes. Every one of these strikes cuts into the bridge that they're standing on. That makes it collapse in this really dynamic way. But in the anime, instead of just using one close-up shot to show the ninja's reaction to this, they show 2 close-up shots of both of the ninjas and just a sort of image of the rubble falling, which isn't great, but it's only on screen for half a second before we cut straight back to Flashy Flash lining up an attack, which isn't the way it's done in the manga. You see Flashy Flash actually reacting to the last attack he parried with his sword, a close-up of Gale, and then Flashy Flash takes this pose, using Heavy Flash slash into Hellfire's block, which shatters his sword, which is done at a slightly different angle and dynamic pose. Usually it's taken from underneath Flashy Flash and up into Hellfire's torso, but instead we're doing above Flashy Flash and Hellfire, which is the pose that is used 2 panels down the line. So realistically, they skip over these 2 panels. This shot of Flashy Flash talking is at the wrong side. So is this swing and Flashy Flash jumping over. We cut straight to a shot of Flashy Flash taking like a horizontal shot in the camera, and cut straight to this perspective shot of the bridge and the ninjas on it. Skips over a shot showing the bridge still crumbling apart from the rubble. We don't get this reaction shot from Gale when Flashy Flash interrupts him. We skip over a panel of Gale jumping over to their side of the bridge, but instead just use a sound effect to communicate that to us, saying that they're going to fight like beasts and drop their weapons. Now, we don't actually get to see Gale drop the weapon. We hear a sound effect of it hitting the ground, and then we see his hands empty. Doesn't really communicate that to us too well, but they've tried at least with sound design. This close-up of Gale is supposed to be frontward facing, but instead they reuse the image from before. The shot of the absolute onslaught and destruction from the fight finally catching up to us as the viewer is, you know, fairly different than in the manga. Far more smoke covering up a lot of the detail, but that can't be helped. When their swords are falling after, you know, they were cut into pieces, there was actually censorship, because this isn't supposed to be their blades, it's supposed to be Gale's hand. Here we can actually see pools of blood underneath the torsos, which actually, you know, believe it or not, isn't present in the manga at all. They removed Gale's nipple, messed up, and his blood is supposed to be like reflecting his face right now. See, like they did here. And that's all the differences I spotted in the manga. There is a lot of content that seems to maybe be planned to be cut. But with all that being said, if they're going to continue from the Child Emperor storyline next episode, you are in for a treat. If it's well animated, that is. But anyway, thanks for watching this video. There was this many differences today in the manga versus anime. And because I didn't upload last week, apart from the manga versus video, I'm going to be uploading 4 times this week. So please stay tuned, and I'll see you probably, hopefully, in a day's time.